Hi, everyone. I'm back for a very anticipated episode with my mentor and sports entrepreneur, Kirby Porter. Switching it up today, Kirby will actually be interviewing me to discuss my thoughts and observations on the college athletic space and just what we should be thinking about as student athletes. Thanks for coming, Kirby.
Of course, I'm so excited for this. The Dartmouth men's basketball team voted to unionize, and this decision could really disrupt the college landscape, transform NIL as we know it. They're not the first time that something like this has happened, but it's the first time that it has gone through. What is your overall take on this and how it's going to impact college athletics?
I would just be crazy to say right away that I had a hard take on this because there's new information coming in every day, but there's a couple of things here that I think is really important. Like, first of all, with the Dartmouth decision, the main piece that really kind of hit their case was the fact that it was based off time. Now it's not based off how good of an athlete you are. It's not based off how good your team is, the revenue you're bringing in. It's, hey, you're spending this much time with the school and kind of the school's dictating your time at this level. You deserve to be compensated for that in some way. And so that's a really interesting angle that they took. And I think it'll affect all student athletes, not just the top Division One.
I think that has been a concern that people have had as we think about like the professionalization of college sports and the different divisions. How does that impact non-revenue generating sports? Outside of men's football, men's basketball, women's basketball, where does everyone else fall when we kind of creep into this space? So I think the narrative that they constructed around it and how they're positioning it is super important. You played through the transformation of the NIL era. Like, what's your viewpoint on how like amateurism has been evolving?
When you think of this big like national push or this federal decision, right, to make make schools have to revenue share, make schools have to pay athletes, you have to realize that it's not just those athletes that you see on ESPN, it's like all of the sports. And we already know that a lot of schools run their athletic departments at a loss. And so when you think of forcing these schools to pay athletes, whether it's from revenue sharing or from, something that they decide in a collective bargaining agreement, that money that we talk about as revenue might not really be seen as revenue in the grand scheme of things when you consider what it's taking schools to keep these teams afloat.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just from what you said alone, there's so many different factors that are playing into the athlete's experience, the administration's experience, brands, collectives, startups, all the different stakeholders, right? How do we think about NIL of, is it good? Is it bad? Is it neutral? What's your perspective there?
NIL gets grouped in with all of these other things that are about athletes' rights. And so I kind of want to separate it for a second. NIL in the beginning and kind of how it is right now is very athlete specific. For the most part, you're not doing NIL deals in conjunction with your school. It's kind of your individual deal with a brand group, whatever. And so schools don't really necessarily profit off that until maybe you get into collectives where you can argue is the school part of it because technically collectives are supposed to be separate. And so NIL is a great way for student athletes to make money off their name, image, and likeness. They do have to do some more heavy lifting because you have to kind of create your brand on social media. There's also pressure now to play really well and to continue to be an All-American or whatever it is that's, causing companies to want to work with you. But I still think that it's a really great opportunity. Any other student at the school who is well known for something or brings a specific value to the table can make money off that. But I do think that in some ways, this push to now pay athletes in all instances creates a lot of problems that we haven't solved yet that we have to figure out. I do think student athletes should be getting compensated for the value they bring to schools, but how we do it is going to be really important.
Definitely. I think it's very important for people to understand just how many different sectors or different aspects of the NIL industry there are. I feel like in my world, my bubble, when people hear NIL, they think about marketing. And in reality, that's just like one little piece of it. Like there's so much more that we're just hearing in this conversation here. Viewing it from like an athlete marketing, democratizing access, democratizing stardom point of view, I think it's been all positive. Like the impact that it's had on women's sports in just 4 years has been amazing. And you think about the compounding of that over time. I'm excited to see where it goes. But when you think about everything else too, it's how do we balance those two aspects of the business and of the industry.
I do think that with this unionization piece, you'll see a big difference based off how to do it, right? So you might decide to create a union among college basketball players, all college basketball players. That might be more focused on finances and revenue sharing of schools paying their athletes or, considering them employees. Whereas I think for something like gymnastics or rowing, where they're not always considered revenue sharing sports, then unions may actually be more like getting the extra resources that student athletes want to see that they're not seeing.
It's kind of discouraging to see, some athletes even lose the opportunity to participate at all if their programs are getting cut. Could you share more about that?
Yeah, I mean, this happened around COVID too. The huge headlines about Stanford cutting a bunch of sports, and there's a lot of Title IX implications of that. But just in general, when finances are put to the forefront, like schools are going to make the decisions that they have to stay afloat. And it's really hard to say. A lot of sports aren't financially valuable to schools right now. And so how do we kind of change that is something I want to see. Not to pick at LMU. I love LA. I'm from Southern California. Announced that they were cutting 6 sports coming into next year. And I think in the press release, they say like to adapt to this new NCAA landscape and to give the resources that we can to our student athletes. They're trying to keep their competitive advantage. They're trying to be a school that people want to go to. And that might mean pulling more resources into less sports. Something that we have to think about when we are asking, what do we want from schools? We also kind of have to consider like, what are we willing to give?
To wrap this up with women's sports, we were both Meta NIL Empower Girlies.
Yes.
How do you see the women's sports component of NIL benefiting from this decision potentially moving forward?
I got to talk to some more people. I think the opportunity for women athletes to potentially negotiate for the things that they kind of try to advocate for. And so I think it'll be really interesting for student athletes to kind of consider what do they bring to the table and what would they want back. And that's something that I don't think student athletes have ever thought about.
Absolutely. Do you have any resources or recommendations for other athletes that want to stay up to date on the rulings, Title IX, and the impact of this decision moving forward?
I'm going to say you first, Kirby. That's how I found out about the Dartmouth decision on LinkedIn. Like, I would follow Kirby on LinkedIn, but also I would check out Chase Griffin has a really awesome newsletter called Athletes Bureau. I love the Gist of It podcast, and check out Let's Talk About It. Come to my Instagram, stick with it. We will definitely be talking about this from all aspects over time.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. This is so great. I'm excited to see where it goes.
Thank you. Hey guys, it's Sydney. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Let's Talk About It. If you did, make sure to leave a review and send it to a friend. Let's keep this conversation going. I'll see you guys next week.